Hello. All right, dishwasher is working again. Yes. Oh, it's like a month of pain. Okay, so I want to document the steps of the overlapping problems of what happened here. My guess as to what caused the initial problem was there's a T underneath the sink, and that T broke, right? So there was a washer inside the T that kind of broke apart and ended up clogging all the line after that. At some point, I had turned on water, and then nothing was coming out. Little trickles of water was coming out of the hose. So I had called my plumber to fix that. He replaced the T, and the line was clear. But I still had no water making it into my dishwasher, and I couldn't figure out why. Now, what I had previously done is I had done the steps that everybody suggests to do, which is first check the float switch, check the float, make sure it's not obstructed, and then maybe it's the water injector, and you hope it's not the water injector valve. So I ordered a new water injector valve. I took it out. I took out the old one. I replaced it. And it didn't work, and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. The resistance on both water injector valves seemed to be within normal for what it was supposed to be. When I had pulled out the water injector valve, unfortunately, complicating everything and adding to my own nervousness with no good reason, but just, I had apparently cut the two wires. So there's two brown wires going to the water injector valve. I had cut them. So I took a red wire of similar looking gauge, about 4 inches, 2 segments of that. I soldered them onto the part that was on the dishwasher, and then eventually soldered them into the clip that goes into the water injector valve. And I wrapped them in electrical tape, and everything was good. So eventually, but I still wouldn't get any water, and I would run a cycle, and it would make it through a whole cycle, and it would dump out the detergent, but it wouldn't put any water in the dishwasher, unlike what you can hear now, water slushing through this glorious. Oh, it's even going. Oh, it's perfect. So I was like, what is going on here? I can't figure out what the problem is. I finally posted on some forums, and they started asking me questions. They said, I told them everything I'd done. I told them I had checked the float switch. I checked the float. I tried 2 different water injector valves. When I put the second one on, that had leaked, and I wrapped some PTFE tape around it. I can't remember which one is in there now. If it's the original one or the new one, doesn't matter. But at some point, I said, all right, maybe my soldering job was bad or something. So I unwrapped I had to cut off and unwrap, which was not fun, all the electrical tape for the soldering job I'd done, kept the wires separate, turning off the power every single time I do this, connected up my multi-tester to it and measured AC voltage, and I was waiting to see, and I would do a run, and I was waiting to see 120 volts, because that's what the water injector valve, which is basically a solenoid, it's a valve. It lets hot water from the sink either go into the dishwasher or not. And if there's no power, it doesn't let it go in. And if it powers it, it pulls it back and lets water through. 120 volts does that. So I was like, I took alligator clips. I clipped them onto the leads. Clipped them onto the wire at the beginning of the solder joint in case my solder joint was bad, and connected it up and ran, and it never went above 7 volts, like 7 point something volts, and it drove me crazy. I couldn't figure out what that was about. So somebody asked me, on the control board, do lines P6-7 and P6-9 have 120 volts across them? And I'm like, I have to open up the door again. So I did that. I opened up the door. I pulled the whole thing off. Finally got access to the control board. Couldn't figure out how to get that off without breaking things. But I did figure out without breaking things, because I didn't break anything. There's little clips on the side. I managed to pull it off, slide the thing off. Got the control board completely off. Got all of the things off of it, so I could get the wires out, and finally took the top off so I could see the board, and I could see exactly which P6-7 and P6-9 were. Those were the wires that go directly down to the water injector valve. First test I tested 2 alligator clips on that, and then tested the voltage on that. And I tried doing a run, and it didn't go above 120, and I'm like, what the hell? But it was making sound in the dishwasher, so I opened the inner door, and there was obviously no water because I hadn't hooked up the water thing, but I heard sound underneath, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I'll bet that is. I'll bet it's trying to drain water. I'll bet and then I realized that as soon as I had the door open and I was doing my experiments with the control board where I was wiring everything up, I had unplugged the brown clip that had all the P6 wires in it, which is P6, 7, and 9 for the water injector valve. As it turns out, I also found out P6, 6, and 4 are the ones that go down to the float switch. Now, at the float switch, I had actually shorted it. I took the plug that goes in, and I had shorted it with a little black cable to itself, but that wasn't working now, obviously, because the whole thing that there was shorting wasn't connected to anything. So then on the board, I shorted P6-6 and P6-4 directly to each other, then ran another thing, then saw 120 volts. And I was like, what? And I was confused. I was happy, but I was confused. It wasn't means it wasn't the control board that was bad. I already knew the wiring wasn't bad because I'd tested connectivity between the wires that would go to the control board and the wires that would go to the water injector valve and to the float switch. And I saw all those wires were good. So my soldering job wasn't bad. So I had to rewrap it up with electrical tape. It's a pain in the ass. But finally, I figured out at least what was wrong with my most recent test. Like I said, my most recent test hadn't been plugged into. Well, no, I already said that part. So I figured, all right, let's try it again. And my goal was I had to go off for food, and I had time to think about it. I think I figured out what happened. I think what happened is when I took out the float switch to test it, which is one of the first things that I did. I took it out, I tested it. It's not conductive. If you don't push the switch, you push the switch, it's conductive. Yeah, it's a switch, it works. And then I put it back in, but I'll bet I didn't put it back in and click it correctly into the cable that plugs into it. I hadn't really seen how that interfaced it. Now that I saw all the clips that were plugging into the board and I saw what they looked like, and then I actually had the clip out of the plastic for the float switch. I saw what it looks like and how it interfaces with it. Like, I probably didn't click it in correctly. So I'll bet what happened is when I was doing these runs and I was waiting for it to fill up with water, it wasn't filling up with water because it was still trying to drain what it thought was water in the dishwasher because it thought the float switch was, it thought the float was up because the switch was broken. So I reconnected the float. I put the float switch back in, and I connected the cable up, and then I tested on the brown cables that go to the control board to make sure I tested for connectivity, and then I lifted the float switch up, and I heard it go off, and then on and off. So I made sure that everything was correct. Then I rewired up everything, plugged everything in again, except the water. I put that to the multi-tester, ran it again, and finally saw 120 volts. So then I rehooked up everything and rewrapped the solder joints with electrical tape and everything, and finally reran it. And it works. Woohoo! All right, so it was overlapping problems. A lot of the problems caused by me in the middle of diagnosing this. The first problem was the pipe failing and it being clogged with stuff. And after that, it was me trying to test the float switch and not putting the float switch back in correctly, even though I was pretty sure I had. Looks like I didn't. And I had made assumptions. I had thought that the... oh, is that? I heard 3 beeps I haven't seen before. Still looks like it's going all right. So I had made some assumptions. I thought that for some reason the switch, the float switch and the water injector valve were in serial, and that's how it was stopping current. Of course, that's not what it's doing. It's a controller board, so it just needs a signal. So there's 2 lines going to the switch, back to the controller board, and then 2 separate lines going to the water injector valve, which makes a hell of a lot more sense. That's what I'm used to from other devices, but I thought that this was just a brain-dead simple thing. Maybe, but it wasn't, which is good. That's it. So now I can wash the 500 dishes that I have piled up and all the silverware, and just in time to actually be able to plan out Thanksgiving. Woohoo! All right, crazy amount of stress now resolved. Yay.